Hey, Sleepy Sheepy here. Today we're going to be looking at a level 75 Dexterity build, and this is going to be showcasing the Ornamental Straight Sword, which is a weapon that gets solely scaling off of Dexterity. However, when it's buffed using the Ash of War, it does get 100 points in holy damage. And this is a flat damage boost, so this is going to be best at lower levels when 100 damage is more helpful than at higher levels when 100 damage is a little less significant. Our level setup is going to be 44 points in Vigor, 23 points in Endurance, and then 43 points into Dexterity. And that's going to be with Millicent's Prosthesis, which does give us an extra 5 points in Dexterity. So we're really only putting points into Vigor, Endurance, and Dexterity for this build. As for the armor, we're going to be using the Great Helm and then the Tree Sentinel armor for everything else. This gives us 105 poise with the Bullgoat Talisman. And then we're also going to be using the Rotted Wing Sword Insignia and Millicent's Prosthesis to boost our successive attacks. And that's going to boost the Ash of War significantly since it is mostly successive attack based. I do have a parry shield on this build just for critical attacks. This can be a little bit useful because these swords have critical modifier of 110, which is slightly higher than your average weapon, which is usually 100, but it's not quite as high as the 140 you get from a Misericorde. So you can swap over to that if you think you're going to be going for parries a lot. I would also recommend something like a heavy thrusting sword or a thrusting sword just for chase downs. These swords are not amazing for chase downs, but for this build I just stuck with this as the main weapon, mostly for the showcase. We'll be using the Crimson Bubble tier to boost our HP when we're close to death, as well as the Spiked Crack tier, which is going to boost charged attacks. That's going to be helpful for the fully charged R2 after we've buffed with our Ash of War. However, you could switch this up to a Dexterity Knot since that's the weapon scaling, or a Holy Boosting Crack tier. So that would help with the damage output associated with the holy damage, I believe, but the Faith Knot tier wouldn't actually do anything because it's 100 flat damage and not scaled off Faith at all. The moveset for this weapon is pretty straightforward. It's just the dual straight sword moveset, so you're going to have really useful neutral light attacks, and then jumping heavies are going to be really strong as well. The running heavy for this is also decent. It's both swords coming forward at the same time, so that's a little bit nicer than the running light attack, which is a staggered attack. However, mixing between those two can be useful during chase downs. However, these swords don't have a ton of range, so that's why I recommend a heavy thrusting sword or thrusting sword just as a chase down method. And the backstep here is also going to be a thrust similar to the running heavy, so that's good to be aware of. Where these really shine is with the Ash of War, which have a unique heavy attack that looks like this. You can charge it and you get some pokes and then the heavy, or you can fully charge it if you just keep holding down the heavy attack and you get 2 sets of quick pokes and then the regular charged attack. So that's pretty interesting, and an Ash of War that I found to be a lot of fun. And because it is actually a charged attack rather than an Ash of War, you're not going to want to put on the Shard of Alexander, and it is going to be boosted by charged talisman. So if you have more talisman slots or you want to mix it around, the Axe Talisman would be useful in this case. I had a lot of fun with it. I think it's a cool, unique heavy attack, and it's pretty good against especially people that are holding up shields because you get so many quick attacks in, and usually they're not able to get out of range, so you'll typically stance break them in the process. That pretty much covers everything that I wanted to say about the build and the moveset we're going to be using, so feel free to go ahead and jump to the invasions. However, I did want to mention that I am trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. That's when I'm able to get some money back from YouTube, so if you do want to subscribe, that would be awesome. Obviously, you can do whatever you want, but I've noticed that if I do mention this in my video, I do get more subscribers per view. So yeah, I want to mention that, and let's go ahead and jump into the invasions. Alright, so jumping into this first invasion, we have a 3v1 that involves 2 melee users and then a hybrid mage melee user, the guy that just got shield broke. He does switch to spells at a certain point, but at the beginning here it looks like mostly it's going to be melee users, so I try to regroup and just kind of assess if this is a good opportunity to use Iron Jar Aromatic. With this build in particular, I felt like it was a good opportunity because the fully charged heavy, especially after you've used the Ash of War, gives you a decent amount of mobility, which you lose out on when you have Iron Jar Aromatic. As you can tell, I'm slow walking here, so I switched to backstepping just to get around this corner. And I roll towards my opponent and am able to do a decent amount of damage, and then the mage just gets kind of blendered here. I actually stop attacking because I don't want to kill the host immediately, and I'm able to take some damage just from the Colossal Sword that this Phantom is using, and then just totally blender them with the Ash of War's fully charged attack. And that's just like a quick 3v1 using Iron Jar Aromatic along with this particular Ash of War. And, you know, I found it to be pretty useful in some circumstances. And I'm going to continue to try to use it intermittently with different builds, especially if they have an Ash of War that, you know, moves you around a decent amount. I find that it's a good way to kind of vary your playstyle, and it can really be helpful in 3v1s, especially if they're aggressive with melee attacks. So next up we have a 2v1. We had somebody with 2 colossal weapons, and that is always a good opportunity for a backstab. So I go for that, and then I managed to get a parry on this really aggressive host that's using some thrusting swords. So you can see here I go for a wake up with the charged heavy. It's good in some circumstances, and you'll kind of see that throughout the course of these invasions, where sometimes people are able to pretty effectively get away, especially if they have higher poise. If you don't stance break them with the follow-up quick pokes, then they're probably going to be able to run away. But you'll see here in this invasion, I will use it again as a wake up, and you can kind of see the effectiveness just kind of based on the area. So we have a lot of Ash of War spam coming my way. We have Bloody Slash as well as the Radon Greatsword Ash of War. And so I take a second to regroup, I throw a Lightning Pot, and I'm able to just kind of get a jumping heavy on the Phantom, which is good. And then here we get a wake up for the Radon attack. I find the backstab to be not too hard to grab for that particular attack. And then here the wake up comes with the fully charged heavy after the Ash of War buff has been applied. And you can see it being super effective there. I think it can hit for over 1,000 damage if you get the full chain off, especially with this setup where you have a bonus to charge attacks, and then you also have a bonus to the successive attacks. So this next invasion was one that I was pretty happy about. It starts off pretty rough. We have somebody with a colossal weapon that can do pretty big damage. We also have the Waves of Gold and Rivers of Blood. So those three things together, especially in an enclosed space, are kind of terrifying. I try to get some just volcano roped pots off to give myself a little bit more space and maybe discourage everybody from coming in and attacking all at once. And you can see it works a little bit. Some players will run around where some people just run straight through it. I do get clipped by Waves of Gold here, and that's one of the reasons it's, I think, one of the less appreciated Ashes of War in PvP, is that any sort of latency can make those waves kind of desync from their actual position, and it's easy to get hit by them. So I kind of realize that things are not going my way in the current space, and this is something I'm trying to get better at, where I will run to somewhere that might have more of an advantage for me. So I realize that this group is particularly difficult to deal with, and I run down this hallway and around these kind of slugs that, one, they'll be something that my enemies can get caught on, and two, they might actually attack and do some damage. I'm not really hoping for the damage to be useful so much as I am hoping that they might get stun locked for a second and either get knocked out of their attack animation, or it'll just allow me to get in some extra hits. And especially with a setup like this, where every single light attack does tons of damage and kind of builds off the previous one, since we have the Millicent's Prosthesis and Rotted Wing Sword Insignia, that stuff together all really makes successive attacks really powerful. And then I also go for Iron Jar Aromatic here, because I noticed that they dropped down. I could see some light coming from that hallway, and so I think this is a great spot for Iron Jar Aromatic. And I also haven't noticed this yet, but I've isolated one of the opponents. So the player with Waves of Gold is not down here yet, which means I'm able to take care of one of the Phantoms. Now it's 2v1, but the Waves of Gold player is doing a lot of damage with their setup, and they've switched to the Magma Blades, which do a ton of damage with their Ash of War and nearly kill me, but I have a second to regroup and get 2 heals off, which refills my health completely, and then they go for a really poorly timed heal. I'm not sure if that was an accident or if they just thought I was going to run away since my health was so low, but it is enough for me to take out the Phantom, and then once it's just a 1v1 with the host, they really have nowhere to go, and I'm able to take them out. Next up, we have just a one-on-one, and this is another example of the Ash of War being a wake-up. So they go up the ladder. I use fan daggers to knock them down. That's a really effective way to get people off ladders if you can hit them from your angle. And I just go for the fully charged, buffed Ash of War and the full wake-up just combos into one another and takes them out in kind of a single moment of damage output. So that was just kind of an example of using it as a wake up, especially for a ladder situation. Next up, we have what starts as a 2v1, and we have someone that's really into using their Vike Spear Ash of War, and it's decently effective. I almost got the full Madness build up on me earlier, managed to get off a Bolus, which was pretty useful. They also start going for this incantation, the Pyromancy there, and that ends up being a really bad choice. They go for it a couple times, and every single time I'm able to get off a jumping heavy. So that's another option for this build. If you do want to put the Claw Talisman on, you could go for less of a successive attack structure and more of a like jumping and poking attack structure with this. So you could put on the Claw Talisman and the Spear Talisman, and then try to go for counter damage pokes with the Ash of War, or get jumping attacks with the jumping heavies or the jumping lights. I guess the jumping light, because it does come out as a sequence of pokes with the Spear Talisman, if it was a counter damage attack, would be pretty useful. So there's a couple different ways to run this build, but I just like the successive attacks method because I think it's kind of fun, and it also really encourages some more aggressive play than you might normally have. And it just kind of compounds as you land the charged heavy. So I thought it was kind of more in the spirit of this particular weapon. But there's lots of different ways to run it successfully. You can see the blue there does go down, and then here I use the charged heavy to stance break the shield. You get so many attacks in there that the amount of stamina damage you're doing is pretty useful, and I'm able to just kind of finish off the host there. They didn't have a ton of health to begin with, but it wasn't so bad. Here we have kind of a glass cannon build from this Phantom. They have dual curved swords that do significant blood buildup, so not as bad as it was before patch 1.07, but definitely something to be worried about. That was kind of a misplay on my part. I think I should have backed off and healed, and you can see I heal once and then realize, you know, I should really have full health if I'm going to be coming in and attacking this person. But fortunately, I have way more poise than they do, and that's something to be aware of if you are facing a glass cannon type build, is that you may be able to outpoise them, and even if they want to get off a bunch of quick successive attacks, the ability to poise through their attacks, other than the blood loss obviously, is going to be really helpful in winning out on trades. And in that case, I kind of just blender them and finish them off, turn it into a 1v1 against a Vike Spear user, and you can tell they're panic rolling a decent amount, so I try to go for a backstab when they go for an L1 attack, and that ends up being kind of the end of that play, and working out pretty well in my favor. Next up we have a 3v1, and this one is a little chaotic. I felt like the attacks they were using weren't demonstrative of amazing skill, but it wasn't something to really like, you can't just ignore that. Everybody here is doing damage, but the amount of damage that they're doing was not negligible, but lower than I would expect from really optimized PvP builds. So this isn't to say that they're not skilled players or whatever, it just doesn't seem like they're really set up for PvP. So I go for Iron Jar Aromatic because I think it's kind of just a fun way to change up an invasion, and this one felt like there was a good opportunity here just from the skill level of my opponent. So it does allow me to take out one Phantom, and that kind of decreases the pressure. I back off on the host because I want to go for the other Phantom. I do get in part of a charged attack with the buffed charged attack, and that ends up doing a little bit of damage, but the buff eventually wears off, the Iron Jar Aromatic that is, and I'm able to chase down the Phantom. I think that moment where Iron Jar Aromatic really throws people off guard. They're expecting your playstyle to kind of remain consistent where you stay in one place, and then all of a sudden you're starting to chase them down, and they're not used to it just from the previous amount of time that you've had the really slow movement applied. So I always think that's kind of interesting, and I've found that the moment that Iron Jar Aromatic does wear off, I frequently will end up with a kill because the playstyle just changes so dramatically, so quickly. And then here we can see kind of something that's interesting. I have the shield equipped in my left hand, but I am able to still use both weapons for the heavy attack. So I'm not 100% sure on how the damage works out like that. I imagine you don't get the strength scaling, but this weapon doesn't really scale with any strength. So I think that you still get the damage of both weapons, which is pretty nice, and kind of a neat aspect of this weapon is that you can use both swords for the R2 even if you have something else in your offhand. So just something to be aware of there. It was somewhat useful in that moment when I thought I might go for a parry, but it's not hugely beneficial across the board. Next up we have a 2v1, and this one was a little bit intense at first. Anytime Moog Spear is involved, you know you can get just kind of killed really quickly, but here I'm able to just kind of keep the pressure up, especially in a one-on-one situation. Moog Spear users really need to be aware that they can get stun locked out of that animation and are really just susceptible to a lot of damage. Next up we have a 2v1, and this host really caught me off guard. I think I was a little bit confused about who is the host and who is the phantom, and I thought it might have been a one-on-one situation, but then the host came out of nowhere and just got a bloody slash off on me, so that was pretty effective there. The phantom here is just trying to apply pressure with some spells, and it's not going super well, so they do switch over to a more melee-based attack. I back off a little bit here because I'm pretty close to death, and it's like two people swinging at me. And then once it's a one-on-one, just after the host backed off, I'm able to get in a couple quick light attacks, and that's enough to kill the phantom. And then I do a little chase down with the buffed charged heavy, so that can be kind of fun. If people are running around you, the tracking is pretty good from a horizontal standpoint, so you can kind of go left to right fairly easily, and it's really just people running away from you that the charged heavy is going to be a little bit less useful. This invasion I just thought was good from a perspective of criticals. So we do have somebody going for the Taker's Flame Ash of War, which does leave you vulnerable to backstabs in some scenarios. And then we also have somebody with the Black Knife or Black Blade, I forget what it's called. And they're really close to death. I'm not sure if they're out of heals or what, but they're not really taking advantage of the little bit of space that I gave them to heal. So now I begin the chase down process, and here they go for the Ash of War, which is really strong, but is really only useful, I would say, in 3v1s or when you have a lot of space from your opponent. So I'm able to get a backstab on that too, and that's another one that I've found to be somewhat susceptible to backstabs if it's done up close and personal to you. So that's just, you know, something I like to put in my invasion commentaries, is people using Ashes of War that are susceptible to backstabs, because that knowledge can be really helpful as an invader, that a crit might be possible there. So next up we have what starts as a 2v1, and the Phantom isn't doing a ton of damage, so I'm able to kind of take care of them pretty quickly, and then a blue gets summoned in. I have some weird issues with locking on and throwing my daggers here, so I'm trying to pop the bubbles here, but it's just not working out with the angles I'm trying to turn around at and the lock-on situation, so I just switched to hitting them with my swords, which I think was definitely the right way to play this, and they're playing really aggressively. I'm not sure why they don't heal here. I think that would have been the play, but I switch over to a freezing pot. That's something that I would recommend. It's a nice way to get some extra damage out, especially if you're using something with split damage. So the holy damage is going through one set of resistances, and then the physical damage is going through another set of resistances. So if you use a freezing pot to frostbite your opponent, that's going to bring down the resistances for both the physical and the holy. It just lowers resistances across the board, and that is a useful way to kind of up the damage from both the holy and physical aspect of your weapon. So that's something that is a good tactic, I think, to employ if you are in 3v1s or something. And, you know, using like the cover of Dragon Breath or something to get off the pot throw can be a nice way to go. And if you wanted to switch between freezing pots and the volcano roped pots, that would be a nice way to get the frostbite damage and then unfrostbite your opponent if you wanted to get the frostbite damage again. So that can be kind of interesting. Here we see the blue just kind of fall off the ledge. So I thought that this was going my way, even though there was a phantom to start with and then a blue and then another blue. The host wasn't really doing a great job of applying the pressure, and then it turns into a one-on-one where I'm able to get some damage out while they're in the rot breath and just kind of take care of them with some light attacks. Next up we have another invasion where I'm using the Iron Jar Aromatic. You can tell that the extra mobility from the charged attack is pretty useful. I'm able to cover some ground aggressively that I might not have been able to cover without it, and it's also helping me ignore some of the damage with the Radon's swords attack, which the Phantom is really using quite often. So I would definitely recommend varying up your attack style, you know, throwing in some jumping heavies. I guess they do go for that eventually. That's definitely a good move rather than just, you know, the the charged attack or the Ash of War, because it is very predictable. You kind of are just kind of hoping that your opponent is bad at a certain point when you use that too much. So I think that's an important note to in terms of like how to play PvP, is you want to be making moves with anticipation that your opponent is going to be good rather than bad. I think in a lot of scenarios, it's tempting to make a move where you think, well, if my opponent does this, it's going to be great for me, rather than taking the approach of, if my opponent does this other thing, it's going to be bad for me. So I think that's something that I try to be cognizant of throughout invasions, is just like, what's the worst thing that could happen rather than the best thing that could happen if I go for a certain attack, or, you know, leave myself vulnerable in a moment. So you know, that's a good example right there, where I go for a fully charged attack and they go for Carrion Grandeur and just absolutely outtrade me with that particular move. I think parrying is a great example of that, because if you see someone with a parry shield, you need to play differently in anticipation for a parry that might come, and you can't assume that they're bad at parrying. And really, because of things like Carrion Retaliation and Golden Parry, you can't really even be sure if a medium shield is less likely to parry, because it has the same parry timing as regardless of the shield that it's on. So you don't get the same parry timing as a small shield, but you do get the same parry timing across small shields and medium shields. So that's just something I would say is a good thing to be aware of, is what's the worst that could happen in any given situation. You don't want to be playing based on hope that your opponent is going to play poorly. And if you can have that mindset, I think you'll play more defensively, but you'll survive longer and really take advantage of your opportunities better. So there's another example where I went for a couple fully charged attacks with my buffed Ornamental Straight Swords, and the opponents adapted to it, and when I was trying to get the Phantom, the host came in and backstabbed me, because you are very susceptible to backstabs in that moment. So I tried to learn from that moment, where I, you know, slowed down on using that particular attack and kind of went more for neutral attacks. But a better way to have played that would have been, you know, being aware that I used the Ash of War, or the charged attack, a couple times in quick succession. I should probably vary up my attack. So yeah, that's kind of a long tangent just on, you know, things to be aware of when you are playing PvP, but that's something that I'm, you know, actively trying to improve on, and I think is a marker of a great player, is just somebody who can really anticipate all the different potential issues with a move that they might be making. And this duo, I would say I really underestimated how much of an issue they were going to cause for me. I didn't think that they were too scary, but between the status buildup from the Phantom, where they've got rot buildup and poison buildup, and then just the raw damage output of the host, this ends up being a lot closer than I was thinking it would, and that was kind of to my detriment. The host here is light rolling and just has a massive amount of damage output potential. I believe they're also using straight swords. I think the Noble Slender Straight Swords, right now they have a katana, which it does do a decent amount of damage, but they will be switching to straight swords at a certain point. And I might have been getting in my own way a little bit by trying to make sure that I killed the Phantom first, which is something that I definitely do, and it's just my playstyle. Like, I don't suggest that anybody tries to kill all the Phantoms first, because it can absolutely bite you in the ass, but it is something that, you know, you probably want to think about ahead of time, and just decide if that's going to be like the rules you set for yourself. Don't expect anybody else to play by the rules you set for yourself, but for me, it's just a fun way to kind of have a challenge, and I feel like it's a really successful invasion if every opponent dies in the process, and the only way to do that is to kill the host last. So there were a couple opportunities where I think I might have been able to get out one more L1, or R1 in this case, and kill the host, but I opted to kind of reset back to neutral instead, which, you know, was okay because I ended up winning this one, but I've definitely died because I haven't done that type of thing in the past. But here it gets really close. I have no heals left, and I managed to kill the Phantom just barely. And now if I get hit, I'm going to be dead for sure. But I am able to kind of wait out these attacks from the host and get that last heal from the Phantom's death, and that allows it to be kind of a one-on-one where I at least have half health, and I don't think the host appreciated how much damage output I could have when I'm not being stun locked by the Phantom. So I am able to finish off the host there, but it was a little bit of a tense situation, I would say, and just kind of goes to show, one, you want to anticipate the worst thing that can happen, and two, if you're going to opt to kill the host last, like, it might not be successful, and it might not be the right call. So next up we have a 2v1. This one I just thought was kind of interesting in terms of using these stairs to my advantage. There's not a lot of space in this area, but just having some change in verticality can be really nice. I'm able to get off a couple fan daggers while falling there and get the last 1 HP from the Phantom, and then I go for a failed parry there, but I do kind of make up for it with a roll into a backstab on the follow-up of that Ash of War, which I thought was pretty good, and it's enough of an intimidation factor to just have the host roll off the ledge there. So a successful 2v1, and just kind of an example of using, you know, even a staircase is going to be much better than just a flat area. Going up and down and, you know, getting jumping attacks or using the iframes associated with jumping can be, you know, useful. Next up we have another 2v1, and this one I think the Phantom wasn't too much of an issue, and the host didn't really have a ton of health, but I did have a good time just in terms of this chase down, as well as you can see the host does switch to a Moonveil, and that just kind of sets you up potentially for a good parry opportunity. So I try to get the rhythm of their attacks. Here they're using some spells. That particular spell I'm not a huge fan of, but they switch back to the Moonveil, and I do get the Carrion Retaliation parry off, which I feel like always feels really good against Moonveil, because you get both the 3 daggers up in the air around you, and you get the riposte, hopefully. And just kind of together with Moonveil, it looks kind of cool. So that was just a nice little 2v1 that ended up working out with a nice crit. Next up we have another 2v1, and here we have kind of a good way to start the fight. If somebody's like not aware of your presence and you want to make them aware, I definitely like to throw a freezing pot. As I mentioned before, it does good things for the extra damage output you get given a split damage build, and it's, you know, a good way to stun lock people just right off the bat. Next, we also do have a host with Vike Spear, so I guess that's something that I was seeing a lot in this particular showcase, is a lot of Vike Spear, but the dual straight swords really are effective at dealing with it. So I think he was going to go for some shield pokes, but with the charged heavy, I'm able to stance break them, and it's pretty effective there. And that's kind of a theme throughout this, is just the ability to stance break with this fully charged attack, especially with all the bonuses we're getting from talismans and the mixed physic. It just is kind of a force to be reckoned with. This is I should call it a 2v1 because the host was pretty inactive for it, but it starts as kind of a one-on-one where I think they were going to see what would happen in a one-on-one situation, and then the other Phantom decides that I'm probably a decent threat and wants to go to turn it into a 2v1, which is absolutely their prerogative. But I'm pretty much dealing with a great shield user, and I'm doing decent amount of damage. I'm doing decent amount of stamina damage as well, which is pretty helpful, but they get hit by that purple thing that doesn't allow you to move from the hand, so I'm able to finish off that one Phantom. And then here I had a little bit of a difficulty getting inside that area just with the amount of space the hand was taking up, but I get hit by their attack once, and then this just I thought was so funny. Really unfortunate for the Phantom there. They get hit with a purple spell as well and just get stuck and are able to get completely blundered by the straight sword attacks, which come out so quickly. And if you can't move, they're really going to eat up your health rather fast. Next up, I'm not really sure where to go, but I do see that the host is on my compass as I leave, so I turn back around, and then I see a little swords sticking out from that pedestal, so I come over and start going after them. They may have been AFK, so not a huge display of skill on my part there, but I just thought that invasion was kind of funny because the two Phantoms were both susceptible to that purple spell from the giant hand, and it just kind of worked out in my favor there. So next up we have a 3v1, and this one was interesting. We had a lot of light rolling going on, and with the range of this weapon, that can be pretty hard to deal with. So fortunately, this first Phantom is pretty aggressive with their katanas and think that they're going to outtrade me, but they aren't able to, so that works out in my favor for sure. I'm able to just kind of blunder them with the straight swords, and that's something you need to be aware of. If you are going to opt for the light roll, you're not going to have the poise to outtrade people with fast attacking weapons. But we do have this other Phantom that's pretty slippery. They get out of there pretty quick, and I'm not able to effectively chase them down. And we also have a host that's using Bloody Slash pretty effectively. The range of that kind of catches me off guard a lot because I can't see them coming in, and then I just try to go for a little bit of a attack that will discourage them from continuously attacking me, but it ends up killing them. But I am still able to chase down the Phantom, so I did get all 3 kills there, but it was one instance where the host died before one of the Phantoms. Next up we have a 2v1 where somebody is using, I believe it's Giant Flame Take-The, I want to say, that giant pyromancy spell that does a ton of damage potentially and has weird timings in terms of when it lands. So I guess it lands at the same time all the time, but if people are free aiming it, it can be really deadly. So I am able to take care of that Phantom pretty quick, and then this person actually had enough resistances to not get frostbit by the first frostbite pot, so I did know that they probably had a lot of frostbite buildup, so I went for a second one, lowered their resistances, and that was really enough to help me finish them off completely. So that was the last invasion there, and I'll go ahead and jump into the outro. If you made it this far, I just wanted to say thanks so much for watching and contributing to watch time, liking, subscribing, all that stuff. It really helps grow this channel. If you are interested in any particular builds, definitely let me know. I'm happy to try out new things all the time, and I've really been just enjoying kind of discovering new aspects of the recent patch and just the depth of Elden Ring in general. So yeah, I hope you have a good one. Bye-bye.